Good morning, everyone. This is Juan Jose Gutierrez, and I'm recording for SBS 300 this morning. I think we had an interesting week at all different levels. I think we had a really solid discussion, and I like the fact that we are reaching a point in the semester in which we can start respectfully challenging each other's positions and statements, as that will help us just continue gaining in sophistication in the way we present our ideas. I'd like to stress that it is fundamentally important that we engage in this level of discussion, and that we engage in this level of discussion respectfully, because if we lose that, then we lose the ability to communicate and to gain knowledge by listening to each other. Sometimes when you present exploring documents and materials and ideas that are somewhat new to you, which will make you as well as make me and anyone else vulnerable to critical remarks and whatnot. And it's difficult sometimes to cope with that, but it is a very important part of gaining that stature that I've been talking about, the stature of being able to frame our thought process in a sophisticated manner. So again, very welcome to the level of discussion that we had the other day, and I want to thank the presenters for provoking that discussion, and that's just something that I really appreciate. So that was a new qualitative moment for me in class. So thank you for those of you who presented, and thank you for those of you that engaged in the way you engaged in the session. That's very good. I actually think we kept it quite respectful and contentious as well. So that was good. So we went over a couple of things this week. Rational choice theory that perhaps needed more attention on my part, but we have limited time. And then the second one is this whole discussion on feminism, that to me is critically important. I have to first confess to all of you that I humbly, but I do consider myself a feminist, in that I remain convinced by the theoretical underpinning of the movement, and that I think it has personally taken me to revisit some of my not necessarily consciously owned, but definitely lived understandings of my role in the planet. And I think without pretending to be an activist or pretending to be more than what I am, I do believe that the theories that feminism have advanced through time have really helped grounding a better understanding of what is possible in terms of gender relations. And it has challenged some of my understandings that were based on a binary system. I do believe, for example, that gender is fluid, just like I do believe that biology and biological and evolutionary theory shows that we do not live in a binary system in terms of explaining sexuality. And obviously, if sexuality is not binary, male versus female, then much less gender. And I don't have enough time today to go through the basic elements of this, but I just want to just flat out state that as a baseline of what's my position. I don't think it's an ideological position in the sense that it is sort of a set of ideas that I just embrace somewhat acritically to advance my action and my political action. But I think it comes from an understanding that the basic definitions and tenets of feminist theory have a solid foundation on both critical theory of culture in Western societies, but also in fundamental tenets of biological life in the planet that comes from an evolutionary understanding of life in the planet. So in that sense, I do not believe that feminism is purely a an ideological movement. Now, I said purely, and that's part of the main point of my presentation, that feminism has been an applied theory from its inception. Actually, it started like a political activism to then become a series of solid theoretical statements to explain gender relations in history. Uh, so from its inception, and because this is grounded theory, it has been closely tied to political activism. And that, I do believe, leads to confusion and to sometimes even ill-intentioned presentations of what feminism is, that is nothing but a caricature of what it actually is. Okay, so having sort of laid down the ground in terms of what I think, and you don't have to embrace this critically, I just need to tell you where I come from so that we can start a discussion knowing my potential biases and knowing my views on things. Let's explore some of the basic ideas of what feminism is, so that we can then engage in a collaborative assignment that I have prepared for you today. So I can state that most college students are asked to keep in mind that feminism has gradually evolved from initial positions in the 19th century all the way toward days in the form of different waves. So that's the way it's being characterized, like different moments that are characterized as waves. And since you and I are college students, yeah, you and I, because I've been demoted to TA, which I cannot tell you how happy I am that I was demoted to a TA for your class. I think it really place you on the driving seat. So I'm just your TA, and I like that. So we college students have been asked to keep in mind that there are 4 waves. So let's go ahead and explore those four waves. So the first wave, it's the most amazing of them all. Of course, this is mostly what's going on in Western societies. I'd love to expand and see what's going on in other cultures and societies. Uh, and I would love to dispel this idea that Western civilizations and cultures set the pace that other nations and cultures follow, because that's just not the case. But the one thing that I need to make clear that we all understand is that feminism is fundamentally a Western culture in nowadays post-industrial Western societies movement that has had a major impact in other places in the planet. But as a Western-based, we're going to have to go back to Europe and we're going to have to go back to the US in the late 19th century to see what was going on when this first wave of feminism emerged. Basically, what the first wave is doing is something radical. It's stating the fact that women should be enabled to engage in political action. Wow. Secondly, that women should be considered to be eligible for basic rights, like the right to not be considered an object, the right to not to actually own property, and the right to make certain decisions within the confines of the existing moral parameters of society. And then women are actually worth being subject of certain freedoms that they didn't have in the 19th century. And this, my friends, was radical, feminism in the 19th century. Women engaged in the movement were shunned as just beyond moral repair. But the important thing in the 19th century is that women, because women had been active writing and thinking and producing things, but always behind the curtains of the dominant position of men in society in Europe all the way to that time. But women have been writing, and women have not just ideas to act on, but they actually created those ideas. And that is the aspect of feminism that we need to focus on. Feminism as activism is very important, interesting, and worth exploring. And with, without exploring it, we won't be able to understand what feminism is. But interested as we are in social theory, what we need to dig in and look for is precisely those ideas and the development of those ideas that created and gave sustenance to feminist thinking. So, what are the theoretical issues that are at stake when we're talking about feminism in the first wave in the 19th century? The equality in rights for men and women, and then the very concept of democracy. So, democracy is an invention from the Greek in terms of an institutionalized form of doing politics. Actually, I'd be surprised if they were the only ones, but certainly when we think of democracy, even the word demo, kratos, it's a word that comes from Greek. So thanks to the Greek, it's the power of the people. Demos is the people, and kratos is power. Aristocracy, which is so rampant these days, is the power of those that have privilege and wealth and can pay for pretty lavish campaigns, political campaigns. That's autocracy. Um, um, there are different theocracy, for example. Usually, the countries like Iran comes to mind, although it's more complicated than that. But theocracy is a system of governance that is based on ideological system. So democracy is a system of governance that is based on the will of the people. So that was first created in Greek. And the basic tenet was all men should have the same right. But wait a second, all men. Well, all men that are owners, all men that are not slaves, and all men that are Greek citizens. The rest is a different ballgame. So these limitations on what democracy is just continued along history when this system was invented, discovered, and rediscovered in Europe, particularly with the emergence of modernity, with the emergence of modern states in the late 17th century. So, and we owe a lot to the French in terms of the instaurations of the democratic systems. And in terms of the setting up of the ideas, certainly the U.S. was exemplar in terms of setting up a system that gave freedoms and rights to the people as opposed to the ruling classes. But that was then. Nowadays, I'm really wondering what's going on with our political system. We have sort of the illusion, if you ask me, of power, when in reality, those who control, those who have access to power, come from a very limited pool of folks in our nation, in our nations, I want to say, because all other nations in the Western world will be seeing similar situations. But in ours is particularly concerning because democracy was supposed to be a bastion of what this country is all about. So sorry for the digression. I couldn't help it. So these radical feminists of the first wave are basically saying women should be subjects to and have the right to engage in political action. They should have basic rights like the right to own things and have property and fundamental freedoms like the freedom of electing representatives, which they didn't have before. because there's no need. If your husband chooses for you, then you're covered. That was more or less the idea, right? So, of course, they were considered like they're going to break the families, they're going to break the rights of people, they're going to break everything, and we're going to go down the drain. That didn't happen, and women actually finally gained those rights and those basic um, elements of access to political action. So that was the first wave, and these radical women continued thinking. Could you believe that? And they continued challenging some of the things. So the second wave comes about because of the Second World War. If you ask me what's the historical event that determines the emergence of the second wave, I would tell you that it was because of the Second World War. During the Second World War, in countries, particularly in the US, as men are fighting the war that the insane, stupid war that the Second World War was, and I say insane and stupid because of the reasoning behind it. So they had to stay home, and then they had to start taking on roles that they were not capable of before, and that capability was culturally determined, not biologically determined. So as they start going into the shops, hammering stuff like Rosie the Riveter, and they started to fly planes. Wow, a woman flying planes. They might not be not that dumb, right? So they they have a sense of empowerment they didn't have before, and they realize, well, why? How come we didn't have access to this before? And as they are enjoying that freedoms, war comes to an end beautifully, and then they are asked to go back to just being pretty and engage in the very important role of organizing social reproduction, because production is the universe that belongs to men mostly. So it was a really unusual situation that should be taken, should be deconstructed and corrected. So that is the historical context in which the second wave starts emerging. Um, oh, hold on. I think I went too far and too fast. So what's going on is there are many, even though women gained some leverage and some presence in political life, they didn't have quite all of it. It was important to reconsider fundamental issues and definitions of sexuality, family, the workplace, reproductive rights, and inequalities that had been made official and that were actually subverted by the needs of the Second World War. So when it was proven that women were capable of holding positions and doing jobs that were formerly thought of as exclusive part of the male world, then second wave feminism will start conceptualizing why is it that women should not only be allowed to be political actors in terms of, say, voting, but also being political leaders, and in redefining some of the rules, some of the obligations that and the interrelation in terms of gender. Those were the big questions that were asked by the second wave of feminism. What are the rights that belong to women and that have not been acknowledged? So you have the sexual revolution. It's quite tied, fast forward to the 60s, to the whole wave of, of civil rights movements. So the country is awakening to pervasive injustices that are ingrained and invisible in the system, and then and those are challenged, and thankfully those are questions, and then um, an act against those structures is completed in terms of the civil rights movements and the civil rights acts that follow suit. women shouldn't be left behind, and they were not left behind because, but yes, again, a bunch of radical women stood and said, we would like to not just have a say on things, but we want to be able to say what needs to be said, and be political leaders in that sense. And to be political leaders, to be economic leaders, you need to somehow not be tied to your reproductive confines, which is what the world of the 1950s, um, when everything was great, was like. And so they challenged that. And as a result of the second wave, I think the nation and the economy of the nation was transforming in really interesting and amazing ways. Because now women fought for and gained access to a number of alternative positions, and to bring their a different perspective into institutions and in ways that we didn't see before. So some people say we're in the third wave, and I think the waves might be a nice metaphor, because when you have one wave and then the next one comes in, things merge and then continue flowing together, and that's kind of how I see feminism evolving through time. So the third wave, what's the nature of the third wave? Obviously, what was done in the 1960s was not enough. In the 1970s and 80s, you start listening and reading feminist authors that are challenging and bringing this idea of the double burden. So women are now allowed to work. Women are now allowed to be political players. But at the end of the day, there's a broom waiting for them at home. And at the end of the day, the cost of social reproduction bears on them. I think of the movement in the United Farm workers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the U.S. And just I'm not going to get into that into detail. Just look at who is the leader and what are the roles that they play. And you will see how Hurtado and other women that were present in the movement had to sacrifice and then be challenged by the very same people that were working in favor of. They were challenged because of their decisions in terms of how they will be dealing with their family and with their reproductive obligations as women. So the children of Dolores Huerta will have stories to tell you about what they liked and disliked about the role of the mother. But Dolores Huerta would have never been who she was had she not made a really difficult decision to not be the prototypical mother, and there was a cost, a price to be paid. So I'm just leaving that as an example of the things that the third wave has been trying to fight for. So how do we create a society that really provides gender, racial, economic, and social justice, and for women and for all? And certainly women were getting the short stick of things. How do you invert sexism, racism, and then classist symbols? And how do you fight patriarchy? So here's the thing with the third wave. They go beyond just defining and fighting for women's right, which is the core of what they still do. But they are now imagining a society where I can be a feminist, where it is important that we all reconceptualize so that we can be part of a whole, a societal whole, that brings really a much more fair and just context for everybody. In terms of social theory, What matters here to us, again, we're going from activism to theory, is how do you support the idea that women need to have equal rights when you need someone to take care of children, right? Um, and women are biologically endowed naturally to do that, most people would say. So what is the theoretical foundation for that challenging of existing structures? That they happen to be, yes, capitalism and patriarchal society. Let's explore that a little bit. So the third wave feminism clearly articulates that patriarchal and capitalist systems are the origin of women's oppression. How is that possible? Someone would say. Okay, let's take a look at what's patriarchal. So patriarchal is a structure, a general structure, in which men have power over women, some sort of a natural order. Or it is a society in which the there's a stratum of male domination that is embedded in powers structures of power that organize social and individual relationships. So let me bring this into frame because I was out of frame. So patriarchal society is a male-dominated power structure through organized society and individual relationships. What do feminist authors would say about that? Here's I posted on to our website this article by Abida Sultana in case you want to read something about it. She would say that patriarchy is the prime obstacle to women's advancement and development. So unless we rid ourselves as society of patriarchal arrangements, then women will never be able to fully develop. And democracy today should be a system that enables each and every one of its members to have an opportunity for the full development of her or his potential, or theirs potential, and we wouldn't have a system like that, then we have a system that needs challenging. So in that sense, patriarchy, which is still pretty much embedded in Western society, just look at the boards of most corporations. Look at the composition of the highest offices of governance of this nation in all three branches, and you will see how there's still room to go, because it's been over a century now of conversations about women right and equality, right? So the second suspect in terms of why women are not faring that well is capitalism, the capitalist system, the evil capitalist system. The capitalist system doesn't have emotions. It's a system. It's a series of rules and resources put in place to certain ends. But the way the system is functioning to this date, the way feminists would contend, it's about creating and maintaining structures of production on one end, and then reproduction on the other one. And all of this is geared towards maximizing output, how much we produce. We need to continue producing and growing. A good day in the economy is a day in which the economy has expanded, as if the planet can expand infinitely. I'm sometimes wondering, how come we don't see how crazy we are, humans? We're just depleting everything. But anyways, that's the nature of the system that we so benefit from. That explains how that I have a computer in front of me, and you have a computer in front of you right now. But the system, the way it works today, it's actually placing women in a subordinate position. And because of biological differences, then not just the actual biological reproduction, but the cultural and social reproduction, actually, it's placed on her shoulders. So it is a crazy thing to say that a woman should get some, let's say, a month off when they just gave birth, and then to ask the same for a man. Why would you give a man a month off if they didn't bear the child in their wombs, because they don't have one, right? So why would you give men the same amount of time? No, you don't. You just give some time to women, and then when they can and they feel that they can come back, they should come back. While women are dealing with the with the consequences of being pregnant and giving birth, men continue to work, and you have one, two kids, maybe three, and so at the end of the lifespan, the work lifespan of a woman, the woman has had to stop working to deal with reproduction, whereas we have continued working. And to this date, today, let's say, what day is today? Today is the 18th of October of 2018. If you're a woman listening to me, you're gonna end up earning less at the end of your work life, less than those of you men that are listening to me, and that's because of the way the system is rigged, or the way the system works. If you're okay with that, then there's nothing to change. If you're okay to earn more at the end of your lifespan, that's fine. But if you are not okay with that, then you might want to rethink. Why is it that you are so captive of a system that would penalize you by all effects, penalize you because of the fact that you bear children? So presenting these ideas, some women, some radical women that are trying to think through all these issues, are stating that capitalism has a lot to do with the oppression of women, and that needs to be revisited, just like just by looking at certain basic tenets and understanding of capitalism. Are all feminists Marxist? No, but Marx actually was quite a thought-provoking individual in terms of challenging capitalism. When Marx challenged capitalism, he didn't actually was able to do away with capitalism. The best examples of communist societies were nothing but capitalism at its worst, because it was state capitalism. What Marx actually did in Western societies was to challenge some of the most egregious elements of capitalism, and enable for the transformation and the humanization of capitalism. So if you ask me, I think these radical writers and women that are challenging once more the capitalist system would probably help us rethink capitalism and retool capitalism so that it's less of a tool of oppression, and we have ways to go, because the capital system is now a global system, and we're going to have to think of this in terms that challenge this idea of borders, and that's problematic, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but that's what the theory of globalization is going to enable us to engage in terms of a discussion. So for those of you that were wondering, how is it that these crazy feminists are saying about patriarchal arrangements and capitalistic systems, there's a couple of examples posted to iLearn. So, where are we now? Apparently, we're enjoying the fourth wave of capitalism, of feminism. So, what is that all about? The fourth wave is defined by women that are smarter and younger than me. We have two examples of women, amazing women, that I selected for this course, Tufechi and Kafer. They are pretty comfortable with the new with the emergence of new tools and digital tools and media tools, and they are now using these tools to address ongoing and pervasive issues of disparity between men and women. So they will be now really applying our understanding of the positionality that women should have in terms of what's going on an everyday basis. So they would be addressing street workplace harassment, campus sexual assault, and the rape culture. By the way, I just heard, and I will post today. I haven't posted it, but I will. I posted a really interesting reflection from a woman about this idea of rape and sexual assault. And you will see how the understandings and the ideas that need to be in place to challenge what enables for rape and sexual assault on our campus are so they are so nuanced. So we really need to create very sophisticated understandings to be able to go against what's going on in our communities nowadays. And again, they do this from a theoretical perspective. So activism is always tied to the theories, and that may be the defining element of feminism. That it's activism that is deeply tied to very sophisticated new understandings of the social, and in that sense, is that we're really interested in feminism. According to the video that we saw the other day, that was so thought-provoking, fourth wave has gone rogue because we've gone beyond what's reasonable. So now we're not just asking for equal right, but we're actually we're back on the bench, and we're asking for the emasculation of men. So we want we've gone all the way to say now men should not even be men, so they have to be something different. Then this idea of fluidity of gender. We have all these problems with the bathroom fights, and should be binary, should be open to anyone, and it's just it's getting complicated. It wasn't that much easier before when it was just men and women, but now we have to deal with these things. Yeah, they actually challenge that and provide a theoretical foundations for challenging the fluidity of gender. We will get to these issues later on. Then apparently, feminists of the fourth generation are just militant about they're gonna make they're gonna make abortion mandatory. Uh, that's pretty bad. And then everything's about the resistance. So it's a political movement and nothing else. So I say, okay, if that is fourth feminism, I'm gonna look for the evidence that is the case, and who are the theorists of the emasculation of men, and theorists of uninhibited abortion and the resistance. I think what's going on with that particular video, and I think there's a reason for that, is that there's sort of an intention to confuse radical activism that is there. Yeah, you have radical activists, just like you had radical activists in the 19th century and the second wave and the third wave. So now you have these radical activists. And everything that a radical activist says or does, then that should be what feminism is. And I'm wondering if that is a fair. You just get a crazy person and you make that person to embody the whole of it, I think that's a rhetorical trick that I'm not falling for. Who benefits from equating feminism and radical positions, uh, as apparently we watched in that video? I think we need to start thinking who benefits from it, and we'll see how other political movements that are more um, uh, supportive of traditional arrangements of the family and politics and whatnot. Those those will be the ones that will benefit the most from this challenging based on in a so equating radical activism with what feminism is today. Now, in terms of social theory, can I say that these are these four elements: emasculation of men, fluidity of gender, inhibited abortion, and the resistance, are those the basic tenets of the theoretical principles of feminism? And the response is no. How do I know this? How do I know that that is not the case? I'd say it's pretty easy, and this is why we're taking this. We're engaged in this course. Let's take a look at what the theorists are saying and what is it that they're writing. So, few examples of what I'm finding to be thought-provoking from the fourth wave of feminism. Let's take a look at Men Explain Things to Me, which is the mentality, or how you might say something as a woman, but women will be able to explain that better. And I have to say that I find often myself doing this in my immediate context, and when I see myself doing that, then I say, wow, I really need to reread Rebecca Solnit once again. It's like we've been programmed to behave and act in certain ways, but just like we have been programmed to do that, we can be deprogrammed and consider benefit, the immense benefit of reprogram ourselves as men and as individuals who embrace this world of binary systems that are easy to handle, but at a great expense to the other, and ultimately at a great expense to ourselves. The agenda, which is a thought-provoking perspective by Coslet and Baxter, which they have created. Or you should take a look at this blog, by the way. They have a book and then they have the blog. And the blog, they collect instances of everyday sexism, and by making them visible, very much so like ethnomethodology was doing, but making them visible, they make visible the deeper structures, social structures that are supporting this type of relationship between genders. So the agenda is the agenda for a new agenda, right? And then this book by Jessica Valenti, Sex Object, a Memoir, which is also sort of presenting a perspective of what it is like to be a woman in a society that so objectivize and sexualize the presence. And then Everyday Sexism, which is related to what I was telling you on the work by Coslet and Baxter. So you can just Google these names and titles and start sort of exploring. This, my friends, is the fourth way of feminism. And if you do find in their writings these ideas, the emasculation of men, the fluidity of gender, uninhibited abortion as almost mandatory, and the resistance, then you let me know and then I'll change my position. But I have to tell you, I looked for it and I couldn't find it. I think I have a little bit more of a sense of respect for the movement than what I saw in that video. So I'm just wondering who posted that video and who gets to gain from that view of feminism that I think is a distorted one. Okay, so there's feminism in 45 minutes and 38 seconds to you. Take a look at the exercise that I'm posting right below my face. You're going to find a forum. and we're gonna, just like last week, we're gonna engage in a conversation in that forum. Alrighty.